Hey, welcome to Discovery. My name's Alex. I'm so glad that you're here. I encourage you, this isn't like just some Netflix show that you're binge watching or some YouTube video that you came across. No, this is church. Man, we believe that you're going to have an encounter and experience with the real living God. We're excited. We have a couple things that we want to let you know about. On Christmas Eve, we're going to have an online digital service at 5 p.m. and then an on-demand you can get at any time on YouTube or in our app or on our website immediately after. There's no in-person service, and our next in-person service will be on January 10th. We're just trying to love our neighbors well, and man, we think this time of online digital church is something new and exciting and something that we can do effectively. And we want to love our neighbors. We want to keep them safe and protect them in this season. We're so excited to have Todd, our community pastor, go into week 3 of our series, Unto Us.
Well, my friend Brian publicly celebrated a strange anniversary this year. This is what he posted on Twitter. He said, "My least favorite Christmas was 2011. Working as a photo specialist for Walmart, he said I was super broke, depressed, and very alone. I had to deal every day with these entitled moms crying and screaming that they weren't getting their Christmas cards done on time. And although the timing was completely in the hands of Kodak, he was held personally responsible by customer after customer. He witnessed emotional breakdowns, people curling up in front of him with tears streaming down their face, personal attacks on his character. He was just treated incredibly terribly." Then he wrote this key line that caught my attention as I read through the posts. "That is when I learned empathy." A season that's meant to idealize and foster in us all kinds of love, peace, joy, patience, actually produces for some people dread, frustration, entitlement, and selfishness. It wasn't until he put on the khakis and the blue shirt that he realized what people in the retail industry really go through, that Christmas really looks like Halloween for many people at Walmart. I hope this is a Christmas, 2020, when we will especially learn the same kind of lesson, that kind of empathy. Because I think that's actually what this season is especially all about. At Christmas time, it's tradition to read through the stories of Luke and Matthew describing the events leading up to the birth of this tiny little vulnerable baby who happens to be God in a bod. Maybe like me in your head, you can hear Linus telling one of their versions of the story right now. But one of Jesus' biographers named John tells the story in a very different way. Instead of explaining the historical events, he writes this kind of cosmic poetry, a philosophical and spiritual take on the significance of this little baby's birth. Now, before we read it, just so you know what he's saying when he says the word, he's referring to Jesus. So this is how it goes. He says, "In the beginning, the Word already existed." Jesus already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. Now, this is one of the most beautiful passages in the biblical library, but poetry is kind of weird and oftentimes takes reading it over and over and over again to get every bit of the richness out of it. And so maybe this week you should read the whole chapter a few times. I promise you won't regret it. But what might especially help as you read it on your own is understanding what that strange use of the word was when they describe Jesus. See, that word is the word logos, which we still use today quite a bit, actually. It's the word ology. It's part of the words that we have heard a lot recently, like biology, pharmacology, epidemiology. Ology, in those contexts, you probably know, means the study of blank, the subject of something. You might also notice it's the foundation of the word for logic. And so for Greek philosophers, like Aristotle, for example, the Logos was the foundational cosmic reality, the logic of nature and reality. For them, the Word would have been the power behind existence, the meaning of life, the most important force that holds everything all together. John is telling the Greeks that Jesus is the secret of the universe. His Jewish audience would have thought of the Logos as being God's divine message or revelation, his word to his people, his words to his people. The word would be the culmination, the ultimate summary of everything God ever wanted to communicate. John is telling the Jewish people that Jesus is God's ultimate message to the world. Another key word here is the word everything, which when you translate it literally means every freaking thing. Every bit of matter in the universe, all that we've ever discovered about molecular particles, the neutrons, the protons, the electrons that are the building blocks of life, they were invented by him. He designed exploding stars and black holes, dandelions and dirt. Jesus was involved in creating every single being that draws breath. From your little puppy curled up next to you to the duck-billed platypus, which, by the way, they just found out glows in the dark. What an incredible animal. Every single animal on the planet he joyfully engineered, except for maybe cats. There's a good chance Satan was involved in that. It also just so happens to mean that every individual human being you've ever encountered, Jesus had a direct hand in shaping every detail of their unique face and body and personality. Now, guaranteed, this is going to be an understatement, but another writer in the Bible, Paul, he tries to describe the same thing about Jesus, and he does it like this. He says that Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all of creation. For through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on the earth. He made the things that we can see and the things that we can't see. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds all of creation together. His knowledge is so vast that it makes the information on the internet look like a first grader's homework. His power is so authoritative and comprehensive that it makes our U.S. elections, including this last one, look like toddlers arguing over the last Christmas cookie. His presence is so pervasive that there are no subatomic changes or collapsing stars or birds hatched in the remotest parts of the Amazon rainforest without him being right there watching. You cannot overstate our reality's dependency on Jesus, and yet, we stand here in the midst of a season where we depict Jesus not as some glorious king or some powerful, invincible champion like Thanos or Superman or Patrick Mahomes, but instead, in the words of Ricky Bobby, we picture him as a 8-pound, 6-ounce, newborn baby Jesus, just a little infant so small and so cuddly. For the record, the writers of the Bible are saying the same being who created this decided to get into the business of creating this. It's that impossible contrast that characterizes the beauty and the shock of Christmas. So John goes on to say a few verses later, the Word became flesh and blood. That means the power of the universe shoved itself inside of organs and bone. The Creator wrapped itself in the skin he designed, just like yours. And he moved into the neighborhood. Christmas is all about God repackaging divinity into humanity, the extraordinary becoming ordinary, the spiritual becoming physical, the one above everything became one among many. Ears to hear laughter and music and even harsh criticism, eyes to see beauty and also the effects of disease, tear ducts to respond fully to both great joy and deep sadness, nerve endings to feel pain, arms to give hugs, a heart to both feel full and to break. In other words, Jesus put on the khakis and blue shirt and made his way into our Walmarts. Now, I don't think God needed to learn empathy, but I do think he wanted to show it to us. The fancy word for this is the incarnation, the incarnate, in flesh, the full expression of God's empathy comes in his embodiment. One of my favorite writers, his name's Brian Stevenson, he says that he got this early advice from his grandma. She said, Brian, you can't understand the most important things unless you get close. And that's what Jesus understood and did. He developed empathy. He grew in understanding of what we were going through because he lived among us. Empathy is what this season is all about for him. God became one of us, and he lived among us. And by the way, the most popular game on the planet right now is all about incarnation. It's called Among Us. It's a game where you're an astronaut working on a spaceship, but wait, one of these is not like the other. There's one or two imposters among them. You can't tell by looking at them that there's something different because they're wearing the same skins. Now, in that game, the imposters that are looking to kill all the other astronauts, that wasn't really Jesus's MO. By the way, middle schoolers, high schoolers, you should follow our Discovery Students accounts if you want to play. They've been all over streaming this on Twitch and other places. If you do, I'll just give you this bit of advice up front. Kai Gratton, he's hecka sus, or so my wife seems to think. And if that sentence didn't mean anything to you, you don't understand it, just ask the oldest kid at your next Christmas gathering, okay? So when we think about God in a bod or spirit and skin, the word becoming flesh, it's natural to try to envision that moment. And so all over my neighborhood and probably yours, there's examples of this. Joseph, Mary, and a little baby Jesus in that nativity scene. They remind me of that line, Jesus moved into the neighborhood. He's in mine and he's in yours too. One of my favorite examples of this exercise of imagination is in Nazareth, Jesus' hometown. There's a church there that commemorates the moment that Mary was alarmingly told that she was going to somehow have a little baby God. Years ago, the church decided to commission over 60 artists from 60 countries to depict that scene. And you should check them all out later. They're really, really beautiful and really cool. But here are a few examples for you, okay? So here's the one from Bolivia. This is kind of what they imagine a Bolivian baby Jesus would look like. Or here's Scotland. It's kind of like a Game of Thrones baby Jesus if he were in that show. Here's another one for my good friends Alex and Rayleigh and Eric and Amanda. This is the Slovak Republic baby Jesus. You can check out his little flavor saver there. That's beautiful. Flavor for the savior. I don't know. In China, you got this baby Jesus that's like riding on clouds, apparently. That's super cool. But the coolest is in Croatia. Now, that's a baller baby Jesus, if I've ever seen one. I mean, I like to think of my Jesus in like a tuxedo t-shirt because he's formal, but he also likes to party. But these are pretty good too. Now, to be clear, Jesus literally wasn't Scottish or Chinese or Bolivian or, and we all need to hear this, American either. Based on biblical references and historical data, the best guess of what he looked like was this: a Middle Eastern Jewish man with darker skin and coarse hair. I found this, by the way, scrolling through Reddit one time, and sandwiched between a bunch of comments about who the historical Jesus really was, someone wrote this, and I love it. He said, it's so hard to worship someone who just looks so normal. Exactly. That's Christmas. That's the incarnation. The worship-worthy word became flesh and just looks so normal. But though Jesus looked like that, I think these depiction of Jesus and Mary as various nationalities and ethnicities captures something so important for Christmas. It's not just about us picturing Jesus in skin, literally, but also us picturing him in your skin. Imagining how he would live in your neighborhood, in your little pocket of the world. It's easy to forget that Jesus successfully started the largest and most ethnically diverse movement in human history. And somehow his message can thrive. It can be incarnate in the midst of every culture through every age of humanity. He knows how to live, and not just in human skin, but in any human skin, including yours. But if that's true, I was thinking this week, what could Jesus even know about 2020? We can't see him walking around in the same ways that his early followers did, but can we see through the little bit that we have, a little glimpse at how he might have experienced the same thing you and I have experienced this year? I mean, some of us throughout this year have seen careers and dreams completely derailed by our floundering economy. I read in the next few weeks, 10,000 restaurants will have to close permanently. I talked with a friend who's a local business owner who's starting to panic right now about what a few more months could do to his business. Some of you are facing the challenge or even the curse of kind of starting over. How could Jesus understand your career? I mean, his trajectory of success was completely set from before he was born, seems to be guaranteed by God. But as Matt reminded us a couple weeks ago, it was immediately after the Christmas story, when Jesus was still young, that his family left everything to live as refugees in Egypt. Under the threat of death, they had to completely start over. For years, they scraped by in cities in a country that were not their home. These stories shaped that young family in a profound way that I'm sure like stories from your childhood shaped you. Not to mention that between the first Christmas and the start of his career as a rabbi, he lived about 30 years in obscurity. Maybe a carpenter, maybe a professional student, we don't know. But at 30, he started all over. And within the context of their life expectancy, that's like starting over at like 50 or 60. From the beginning of his life to the end, Jesus knew all about starting over. But what about our relationships in 2020? How could Jesus understand that? I mean, everywhere he went, he was surrounded by crowds and passionate followers. I mean, what are those anymore? He was almost never alone. But during this pandemic, you've been more alone than ever. You were single before it started, and those stay-at-home orders made you feel not just single, but isolated. Or maybe for others of us, all this forced family time revealed some deep relational cracks. And the pressure has not only seemed to drive your family apart. Our area, more than most any other in the United States, struggles with marriages in crisis. Maybe one day this year you looked across the kitchen table and you didn't recognize the person on the other side anymore. They seemed like a stranger. Maybe for some of us, we entered the quarantines together, but you're leaving alone. For some, this time has been an incubator of isolation, a crock pot of conflict. How could Jesus understand what you're going through if he was never alone? Well, Jesus was never alone in the sense that God was always with him. He may have felt like the most isolated man that's ever lived. I was talking to a friend of mine who was recently divorced. His wife became unrecognizable to him, and she no longer seemed to see him anymore for who he was either. I reminded him of this description of Jesus' own experience. It's also part of John's Christmas story. He writes this: "He came into the very world he created, but the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him." If you've ever felt abandoned or disowned or rejected by people that were supposed to be the people that loved you the most, Jesus knows all about that feeling. Or maybe for you, the worst part of 2020 was less out there and more in here. I think we all have felt an extra sense of anxiety, a new level of depression at one point or another this year. Whether it was swelling beneath the surface, making us more irritable or impatient, or surging out of us in more obvious ways, real stress today about possible problems tomorrow force themselves on our minds and our hearts. A mysterious virus, a collapsing economy, your college friends' insane Facebook posts. How could Jesus understand your anxiety? And we know. We heard it right here at the beginning of this pandemic. The Bible says, do not be anxious about anything. But if we're honest, we simply can't help it. I mean, is Jesus reading the same news I'm reading? Didn't he hear what Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow said? What about the study on the vaccines that just came out, or the collapse of that basketball player who had COVID early on? What about the lingering side effects of COVID that we're just finding out about now? How will I keep my kids' attention on Zoom another month while I try not to get myself fired? What about the conspiracy plots that you read on Facebook, the war between the Illuminati and the lizard people that will destroy us all? Isaiah once predicted that Jesus would be a man of sorrows, well acquainted with the deepest grief. One of Jesus' biographers, a doctor named Luke, said that the night before he died, Jesus was talking to God about the plot to kill him, and he knew what was ahead, and it created such anxiety in him that the capillaries in his forehead burst, and in his anxious sweat, blood mingled. It's a real rare medical condition called, let me see if I can get this right, hematidrosis. Maybe it's not so rare this year. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Jesus was the happiest person that's ever lived. In fact, I think because he was fully human and fully God, he was more emotionally healthy than any of us can even probably imagine. So he felt both the highs and the lows of life more than anyone in human history. Jesus wants to help alleviate or even eradicate your anxiety or your depression or whatever you want to call it, but he also knows it intimately. Isaiah goes on to say, Yet it was our weakness he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. This was written about Jesus hundreds of years before he was born, and it holds true thousands of years after. So don't be ashamed to bring to Jesus the messy things that make you human. He can handle the weight of your sorrows too. The concept of a priest in the Bible is this old idea of like a mediator between God and humanity, a person that's supposed to help us relate with God and God relate with us. So that's Jesus' unique role now. So the writer of Hebrews explains it this way. He says, now that we know what we have, Jesus, this great high priest with ready access to God, let's not let it slip through our fingers. We don't have a priest who's out of touch with our reality. He's been through weakness and testing. He's experienced it all but the sin. So let's walk right up to him and get what he is so ready to give. Take the mercy, accept the help. So if I could put that passage in 3 words, Jesus gets it way better than you think. And not only does he understand our pain, he also understands our attempts to cope with it. Oftentimes, our biggest mistakes come at our most desperate times. And this passage talks about how he empathizes with our temptations too. Jesus knows well all about those unhealthy coping mechanisms, though he never chose them himself. He knows what it's like to be tempted to numb the pain with things like alcohol, or to fantasize about sex with someone else, or to the anger that leads to gossip and slander, or any other escapist, sinful behaviors you can dream up. If he were in your skin, I'm sure he'd just want to binge away 2020 with a Parks and Rec marathon too. So when you screw up because you're depressed or you're anxious or you're angry, you don't have to try to hide it from him. He gets it. But also we're told over and over again that if we look to him in the midst of our struggle, he'll provide a way out. And so as Hebrews says here, take the mercy, accept the help. His wisdom and guidance is not uninformed. It actually works. Why? Because he's been there before. He knows how to lead you through it. In fact, leadership gurus are just starting to recognize the genius of Jesus in getting the best out of us. In a recent TED Talk, one of the best out there, Simon Sinek, said that empathy and perspective are the 2 things leaders need the most. He concludes his talk saying this. He says, our people become the right people when we give them the right environment inspired by empathy. He's saying to leaders, instead of trying to get the best people in the right places, we need to get the best out of the people that are already in the places. He told this story about a bartender in Vegas who works at 2 casinos. He loved and excelled at the Four Seasons, but he hated and he counted the minutes down at Caesar's Palace. The only difference is what the management cared about. At Caesar's Palace, they only came around to ask what he was doing. At the Four Seasons, they asked how he was doing, and if there was anything they could do to make his job easier. Jesus leads us in the same way that the best leadership coaches would tell you to lead. His way will bring the best out of you. He cares less about your performance and more about your person. He cares less about your production and more about your peace. Jesus has put on the blue shirt and khakis. He's walking around asking his people not what they're doing, but how they're doing. The crime writer and poet, a friend of C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, her name's Dorothy Sayers. She once wrote about this like this. She said, God can ask nothing from man that he has not asked from himself. He has himself gone through the whole human experience. From the trivial irritations of family life and the cramping restrictions of hard work and the lack of money to the worst horrors of pain and humiliation, defeat, despair, and even death. And when he was a man, he played the man. He was born in poverty and he died in disgrace, and he thought it well worthwhile. Many have asked, where has God been in 2020? And he answers, been there, done that. I've been there before, I'll be there again, I'm there with you now. You know, if you think about it, most of what made 2020 suck so much was not a virus or the strictness of any orders of any government or the way your uncle or your niece voted or even Facebook. What made 2020 suck most was this, a severe lack of empathy. The inability of so many to imagine themselves inside the skin of another who looks or lives or thinks differently than them. This is crazy, but can you imagine if Republicans tried to empathize with Democrats? Or Democrats empathize with the Republicans? Or even crazier, what if they both tried to empathize with the people they're actually supposed to serve? The racial conflicts in our world that erupted this year were a reflection of just how little some of us are prepared to understand what it's like to literally be in someone else's skin. I've read and heard and talked more and more this year with so many black leaders and friends who say the same thing. If I were in their skin, I'd have the same fears, anger, scars, and stories. How much would the arguments surrounding masks or government restrictions change if there was just a little bit more empathy injected? Would more empathy mean less criticism of leaders or policies, or at least maybe better criticism because we're trying to see where they're really coming from? How would empathy change the way we intentionally spend our money this Christmas with our local restaurants and business owners? 2020 had a lot of sucky things about it, but the number one thing that made it suck was our occasional failure to empathize with each other, especially those who are experiencing all of this way different than us. Now, for the record, I'm not talking about our church family. You guys have been incredible. I'm personally really proud and inspired to be a part of this community. I've seen you guys respond with compassion and wisdom and generosity, and you acted so much like Jesus throughout this insane year. But I am talking to our church family. And what the world needs now is what we have the unique ability to give because Jesus showed us the way. See, when his flesh and bones left this planet, I don't think the incarnation stopped. I think that's why you're watching this right now. For the last 2,000 years, God's empathy has only extended to reach beyond the one person he was and is now embodied through all of his people. So here's what I hope we learn this Christmas. Like my friend Brian, if God became one of us, then we should become one with those around us. Just as he did, he's asking us to suit up, to empathetically put ourselves in their shoes, to see through their eyes, to imagine ourselves in their skin. In the early days of YouTube, and yes, kids, I remember the beginning of it all, one of the first big viral videos was from this group called Improv Anywhere. They had about 100 people dress up in khakis and blue polos and go into a New York City Best Buy. Their instructions were this: 1, don't claim that you work there, and 2, if you can help someone who asks, just go for it. As you might expect, this kind of freaked out Best Buy, and they ended up calling the cops. But when the cops got there, they kind of rolled their eyes and said, there's no reason for us to be here. There's no law against wearing blue polo shirts. Maybe this is a picture of the church. We try to put ourselves in other people's uniforms, their blue shirts and khakis, and we go into the world and we just see if we can help. Brene Brown is a Christian who's an emotional health researcher. She writes this: empathy is strange and powerful. Empathy has no script. There is no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting and communicating the incredibly healing message of you're not alone. And that's what Jesus wanted so desperately to say to you. So desperately that he came to this planet as a vulnerable little baby in a forgotten part of the world, under threat of death that grew with every step he took. He wanted you to know you're not alone. You don't have to be alone. No matter the lies and the fears and the distractions that swirl around you, he came to deliver that message to us in person. He said, I'm for you and I'm with you, especially because I've even been one of you.
I love what Todd is saying about how God, through Jesus, became one of us. While Jesus was on this planet, he took some bread and he took some juice, and he was with his closest friends. And he said, hey, remember me, right? That this bread is my body and this wine is my blood, and it's broken and it's poured out for you and for me. He said, anytime you guys gather like what we're doing right now, remember me. So each week at Discovery, we take a couple minutes and remember him. So grab some crackers or bread at your house, grab some juice, right? Maybe it's orange juice because it's in the morning. But remember what Jesus did, that God became one of us.
Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8 says, "You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross."
If my heart is overwhelmed and I cannot hear your voice, I'll hold on to what is true, though I cannot see. If the storms of life they come and the road ahead gets steep, I will lift these hands of faith. I will believe. I remind myself of all that you've done and the life I have because of your Son. Love came down and rescued me. Love came down and set me free. I am yours. I am forever yours. Mountain high and valley low, I sing out and mind my soul. I am yours. I am forever yours. When my heart is filled with hope, every promise comes my way, and I feel your hands of grace rest upon